The gunshot echoed through the valley like thunder, startling a flock of birds into flight as Rosalind Walker ducked behind the overturned wagon, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her trembling fingers clutched the telegram that had started this whole nightmare, the message from her brother begging for help at their family's homestead outside Council Bluffs, Iowa. Now, trapped between outlaws and the growing wall of flames they'd set, she wondered if she'd ever see him again. It was 1876, and the Western Territories remained as untamed as they were unforgiving. Rosalind had left the relative safety of St. Louis just 2 weeks prior, after receiving the desperate plea from her younger brother Thomas. Their parents had died of fever the previous winter, leaving the 19-year-old boy to manage the homestead alone. His telegram had been sparse on details, mentioning only trouble with men who want our land and asking for her help. Come out now, Miss Walker. Your brother's debts need settling one way or another. The gruff voice belonged to Vernon Tate, a land speculator with eyes set on the Walker property and the newly discovered water source it contained. Rosalind pressed her back against the wagon's wooden frame, the heat from the spreading fire warming her face even from 30 yards away. Thomas lay unconscious beside her, blood seeping from the gash on his temple where Tate's men had struck him. The outlaws had surrounded them as they'd attempted to reach town for the sheriff, setting fire to the dry prairie grass to drive them out. 5 more minutes and those flames reach your wagon, Tate shouted. What's it gonna be? The crackling of the fire grew louder, hungrily consuming the drought-parched grass. Smoke stung Rosalind's eyes as she assessed their dire situation. Their horses had bolted at the first shots, and Thomas needed a doctor. The wall of fire between them and town was growing rapidly, fed by the autumn winds. Maybe we should just give them the deed, Thomas mumbled, regaining consciousness. It ain't worth dying for. This land is all we have left of mother and father, Rosalind whispered fiercely. I didn't travel halfway across the country to surrender it to thieves. A new sound cut through the chaos hoofbeats, fast and determined, approaching from the west. Rosalind peered cautiously around the wagon's edge to see a lone rider galloping toward them, silhouetted against the setting sun. The stranger rode a powerful black stallion, his form tall and imposing in the saddle. As he drew closer, Rosalind could make out the details of his weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat's strong jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes sharp as a hawk's, and an expression of pure determination. "Who the hell is that?" one of Tate's men shouted, turning his gun toward the approaching rider. The stranger didn't slow, driving his horse straight toward the wall of flames that separated him from Rosalind and Thomas. Without hesitation, man and beast plunged through the fire in a heart-stopping moment that seemed to defy nature itself. "Get down," the stranger shouted as he emerged through the smoke, drawing his pistol and firing in one fluid motion. One of Tate's men fell with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. The newcomer dismounted in a swift, practiced movement, using the wagon as cover alongside Rosalind and Thomas. Up close, she could see his face was streaked with soot, his leather coat singed from the flames. "Owen Daniels," he introduced himself curtly, reloading his revolver with practiced efficiency. "Sheriff from Council Bluffs, got word Tate was causing trouble out here. You rode through fire for strangers?" Rosalind asked, disbelief evident in her voice. Owen's eyes met hers, something unexpected flickering in their depths. "You're worth every scar I'll earn tonight," he said simply, before turning back to the situation at hand. "How many men does Tate have with him?" "5 that I counted," Rosalind answered, trying to ignore the way her pulse had quickened at his words. "My brother needs a doctor." Owen nodded grimly. "First, we need to get you both out of here. That fire's spreading too fast." He looked at Thomas's wound. "Can he ride?" "I can manage," Thomas insisted, though his face was pale. Another bullet splintered the wood near Rosalind's head, sending her ducking lower. "Sheriff Daniels," Tate's voice boomed across the distance. "This ain't your jurisdiction. The Walker boy owes me money and I'm collecting on his land." Owen's jaw tightened. "Council Bluffs is exactly my jurisdiction, Tate, and I know for a fact the Walkers don't owe you a damn thing." He turned to Rosalind. Your brother filed a complaint last week. I was already investigating Tate for forging loan documents to steal land from folks." Rosalind glanced at Thomas, who nodded weakly. "I tried to tell you in the telegram, but I didn't want to worry you more than necessary." "Listen to me carefully," Owen said, his voice low and steady. "My deputy and some men from town should be coming up from the south. We need to create a diversion to slip away toward them." He gestured to the growing flames. "The fire's going to trap Tate's men soon enough. They know it too, that's why they're getting desperate." As if to confirm his assessment, 2 of Tate's men mounted their horses, clearly preparing to flee the advancing fire. "Tate," one of them called, "this is getting too hot. We need to pull back. Nobody leaves until I get that land." Tate roared back. Owen checked his ammunition. "That's our opening. When his men start arguing, we make for my horse. He can carry all 3 of us far enough to reach help." Rosalind nodded, helping Thomas to a sitting position. "We're ready when you are." The tension in Tate's group escalated as the flames grew higher, their angry voices carrying on the wind. Owen watched carefully, then nodded. Now, Rosalind helped her brother to his feet while Owen provided covering fire. They stumbled toward his waiting stallion, which stood remarkably calm despite the chaos around them. A bullet whizzed past Rosalind's ear as they reached the horse. Owen lifted Thomas into the saddle first, then helped Rosalind up behind him before swinging up behind her. The close contact sent an unexpected thrill through her body, inappropriate as it was for their dire circumstances. "Hang on," Owen commanded, spurring the horse forward. They thundered away from the burning prairie, Tate's bullets falling short as the distance grew. Rosalind held tight to her brother, acutely aware of Owen's strong arm around her waist, steadying them all. As they crested a hill, Rosalind saw riders approaching, men wearing deputy badges, coming to their aid. They were safe. Only then did she notice the burn along Owen's forearm where his sleeve had caught fire during his dramatic rescue. Without thinking, she touched the wound gently. "You're hurt." His eyes met hers again, something unreadable in their depths. "Like I said, Miss Walker, worth every scar." And in that moment, surrounded by danger yet strangely protected, Rosalind felt something shift inside her, something unexpected and thrilling that had nothing to do with their escape, and everything to do with the man who had ridden through fire to save them. Deputy Marshal Fletcher reached them first, his weathered face lined with concern. "Sheriff, thank the Lord you're all right. We saw the smoke from town. Tate and his men are back there," Owen reported, nodding toward the spreading fire. "The young man needs a doctor." "Miss Walker here could use some looking after as well. And you, Sheriff?" Fletcher asked, eyeing the burn on Owen's arm. "I'll live," Owen replied simply. "Let's get these folks to town, then round up Tate and whoever's still with him." The ride to Council Bluffs took nearly an hour, during which Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness. Rosalind remained sandwiched between her brother and Owen, the sheriff's presence both reassuring and unsettling in ways she couldn't quite define. Council Bluffs was larger than Rosalind had expected, a proper town with wooden sidewalks, a telegraph office, and even a small hotel alongside the expected saloons and trading posts. The railroad had brought prosperity, evident in the newer buildings and busy streets. They rode directly to the doctor's residence, where Owen gently helped Thomas down from the horse. "Doc Miller's the best physician this side of Omaha," he assured Rosalind as they carried her brother inside. The doctor's home smelled of carbolic acid and herbs, clean and orderly despite the frontier setting. Dr. Miller, a balding man with spectacles and a kind face, immediately set to examining Thomas's head wound. "Nasty blow, but the skull seems intact," he pronounced after careful examination. "He'll need rest and observation for a few days. Concussions can be tricky business." Relief flooded through Rosalind. "Thank you, doctor." "And now," Dr. Miller said, turning toward Owen, "let's see that arm, Sheriff." Owen reluctantly rolled up his sleeve, revealing an angry red burn stretching from wrist to elbow. Rosalind winced at the sight of it. "Riding through fire again, Daniels," the doctor sighed, shaking his head as he gathered ointment and bandages. "One of these days your luck will run out." "It wasn't luck," Owen replied, his eyes finding Rosalind's across the room. It was necessity. As the doctor treated Owen's burn, Rosalind sat beside her sleeping brother, finally allowing herself a moment to process everything that had happened. She had arrived in Council Bluffs just 3 days ago, finding Thomas desperately trying to fend off Tate's increasingly aggressive attempts to seize their land. The property itself was modest 80 acres with a small but sturdy cabin their father had built, a barn, and a creek that ran through the western edge. What made it valuable was the natural spring discovered the previous summer, a reliable water source in a region where drought was common. "Your brother will sleep through the night," Dr. Miller said, interrupting her thoughts. "You should get some rest yourself, young lady. There's a boarding house down the street, Mrs. Holloway's place. Tell her I sent you." "I can't leave Thomas," Rosalind protested. "My wife will stay with him," the doctor assured her. "You've had quite an ordeal. Sleep will do you good." Owen, his arm now properly bandaged, stood from the examination table. "I'll escort you to the boarding house, Miss Walker. Then I need to check on the situation with Tate." Outside, the night had fully descended, the streets of Council Bluffs lit by scattered lanterns. Most businesses were closed for the evening, though light and piano music spilled from the saloon down the street. "I never properly thanked you," Rosalind said as they walked side by side. "You saved our lives back there." Owen shook his head. "I was doing my job. Your brother had reported Tate's threats. I just wish I'd gotten there sooner." "How did you find us?" "I was already heading to your property to warn you both when I saw the smoke." He didn't finish the sentence. "Still, riding through fire was beyond duty," she insisted. "That was bravery." In the lamplight, she could see color rise in his tan cheeks. "Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true." Rosalind studied him more carefully now. He was perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into bright sunlight and distant horizons. His hands were calloused, his movements economical and purposeful. Everything about him suggested capability and quiet strength. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story clapboard building with lace curtains in the windows. Before Rosalind could knock, Owen placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Miss Walker, about your property, Tate isn't the only one who'll come after it. That spring water makes your land valuable, especially in these drought years." Rosalind nodded. "I gathered as much, but it's all Thomas has left of our parents. I won't let anyone take it from him." "You're planning to stay then? I thought perhaps you'd take him back to St. Louis with you." "I came to help him, not uproot him," she said firmly. "Besides, I've nothing waiting for me in St. Louis anymore. I was working as a school teacher there, but—" She trailed off, the memories still painful. Owen seemed to understand her reluctance to elaborate. "Council Bluffs could use a good teacher. Our last one left for California 3 months ago." The idea settled in Rosalind's mind, feeling right somehow. "Perhaps I'll inquire about the position." "I'd be happy to introduce you to the town council," Owen offered. Then, with a tilt of his hat, he added, "Rest well, Miss Walker. I'll check on your brother in the morning." As he turned to leave, Rosalind called after him. "Sheriff Daniels," he paused, looking back, "thank you for riding through the fire for us." A small smile crossed his face, softening his weathered features. "Good night, Miss Walker." As she watched him walk away, Rosalind felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a flutter of interest, of possibility. It was ridiculous, of course. She had only just met the man, and under the most harrowing circumstances. Yet something about Sheriff Owen Daniels called to her in a way no one ever had before. Pushing such thoughts aside, Rosalind knocked on the boarding house door, ready to find whatever rest she could after the day's events. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Tate and his men, her brother's recovery, decisions about their future. But for now, she allowed herself to feel simply grateful to be alive. Mrs. Holloway proved to be a kindly widow who fussed over Rosalind's smoke-smudged appearance and immediately set about preparing a bath and a late supper. The boarding house was modestly furnished but immaculately clean, with a parlor for guests and 4 bedrooms upstairs. "Sheriff Daniels is a good man," Mrs. Holloway remarked as she showed Rosalind to her room. Best thing that ever happened to this town. Before he came 3 years ago, Council Bluffs was wild as any place west of the Mississippi. He seems very dedicated, Rosalind replied carefully. Dedicated. That's one word for it. Fearless is another. The older woman smoothed the quilt on the bed. Lost his family in a fire some years back before he came here. Perhaps that's why he's never afraid of the flames. The information struck Rosalind deeply. His words, "You're worth every scar I'll earn tonight," took on new meaning. For a man who had lost loved ones to fire, charging through flames for strangers was an act of extraordinary courage. "I didn't know," she said softly. "He doesn't speak of it," Mrs. Holloway replied. "But it explains a great deal about him, doesn't it? Now, get some rest, dear. Breakfast is at 7. That night, Rosalind dreamed of fire and a silhouetted rider charging through flames to reach her. When she woke at dawn, the memory of Owen Daniels' face as he'd emerged from the smoke stayed with her, burned into her mind as surely as the prairie fire had scarred the land. After breakfast, Rosalind hurried to check on Thomas. She found him awake, though pale, eating broth under the watchful eye of Dr. Miller's wife. "Rosie," he greeted her with relief, "I was worried about you." "Me, you're the one with the head wound," she chided gently, taking a seat beside his bed. "Sheriff Daniels came by earlier," Thomas told her. "Said they caught Tate and 2 of his men. The others fled, probably all the way to Nebraska territory by now." Relief washed over Rosalind. "So it's over?" Thomas shook his head, wincing at the movement. "Not entirely. Tate has connections, business partners who want our spring. The sheriff says we should be careful once I'm back on my feet." "We will be," Rosalind promised. "And I've decided to stay in Council Bluffs, Tommy. I might even apply for the teaching position here." Her brother's eyes widened with surprise and delight. "Really, you'd stay?" "Of course. We're family, all we have left is each other." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, I think I might like it here." "Because of the sheriff?" Thomas asked with unexpected perceptiveness. Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Don't be ridiculous, I barely know the man." Thomas smiled weakly. "The way he looked at you when he thought I was still unconscious. I'd say he'd like to know you better." Before Rosalind could respond to this startling observation, the door opened and Owen himself entered, carrying his hat in his hands. He looked tired but satisfied, clearly having worked through the night. "Miss Walker, Thomas," he greeted them. "Glad to see you awake, young man." "Sheriff," Thomas nodded. "Rosie tells me you're going to help her apply for the teaching position." Owen glanced at Rosalind, surprise evident in his expression. "You've decided to stay, then, if the town will have me," she confirmed. A smile spread across Owen's face, transforming his serious demeanor. "The town council meets tomorrow. I'd be happy to introduce you." "Thank you," Rosalind said, suddenly feeling shy under his approving gaze. "Now," Owen continued, becoming professional once more, "I need to discuss what happens next with Tate and his men. They're in my jail, but the circuit judge won't be through for another 2 weeks." The conversation turned to legal matters, sworn statements they would need to provide, the charges against Tate, and precautions for their safety. Throughout the discussion, Rosalind found herself studying Owen, noticing details she had missed in yesterday's chaos. The faint scar along his jawline, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly when he made a point, the careful attention he gave to Thomas's questions. When Dr. Miller arrived to check Thomas's bandages, Owen suggested he and Rosalind continue their conversation outside to give the doctor room to work. The morning was bright and clear, the autumn air crisp after yesterday's fire. Smoke still lingered on the horizon, a reminder of their narrow escape. "How's your arm?" Rosalind asked as they strolled along the main street. Owen flexed his bandaged forearm. "Healing. Dr. Miller says I was lucky, could have been much worse." "Mrs. Holloway told me about your family," Rosalind said quietly. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Owen's step faltered momentarily, his expression closing. "Mrs. Holloway talks too much. She meant well," Rosalind assured him, "and it helps me understand why what you did was so remarkable." He was quiet for several paces. "My wife and daughter died in a house fire while I was away on duty," he finally said, his voice low. I was a deputy marshal then, tracking outlaws near Kansas City. By the time I got the news and returned home, the funeral was over. That's terrible, Rosalind whispered, her heart aching for him. For a long time after, I couldn't even look at a campfire without shaking, Owen continued, surprising himself with his candor. Then one day, a child was trapped in a burning barn. Nobody would go in. I realized my fear was dishonoring their memory. So you conquered it, Rosalind said with understanding. Not conquered. We never truly conquer our deepest fears, Owen corrected. I just decided some things matter more than fear. Their eyes met, and Rosalind felt a connection forming between them, a recognition of kindred spirits who understood loss and resilience. The moment was broken by a shout from down the street. Deputy Fletcher was running toward them, face grim. "Sheriff, trouble at the jail." Owen's expression hardened instantly. "Stay here," he instructed Rosalind before running toward his deputy. Naturally, she ignored this command and followed at a distance. The jail was a small brick building near the center of town with barred windows and a sturdy door. As they approached, Rosalind could see a crowd gathering, voices raised in anger. "Lynch him. Lynch the land grabber," someone shouted. Rosalind recognized several farmers from the surrounding area, men whose land Tate had attempted to steal through forged documents and intimidation. Their anger was understandable, but the mob mentality sent a chill through her. Owen pushed through the crowd, his voice cutting through the commotion. "That's enough. This isn't how we handle justice in Council Bluffs." "What justice?" a farmer named Hendricks challenged. "The judge will let him go with a fine." Meanwhile, the Collins family lost everything to his schemes. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Owen stood firm before the jailhouse door, one hand on his holstered gun. "I understand your anger," he said, his voice carrying. "Tate has hurt many of you, but if we take the law into our own hands, we're no better than him." "Easy for you to say, Sheriff," another voice called. "Your land ain't at stake." "No, but my badge is," Owen replied evenly. "And everything it stands for. Go home, all of you. When the judge arrives, you'll have your chance to testify." The standoff continued, tension thick in the air. Rosalind watched in admiration as Owen stood unwavering, a single man against a crowd driven by righteous anger. His quiet authority gradually had an effect. The shouting subsided, and reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse. Only when the last protesters had left did Owen's shoulders relax slightly. He noticed Rosalind then, giving her a look of exasperation. "I believe I asked you to stay back," he said as she approached. "You did," she acknowledged with a small smile. "I chose not to listen." Despite himself, a reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "You handled yourself well yesterday during the attack. Most people would have panicked." "I've had practice staying calm in difficult situations," Rosalind replied, thinking of the cholera outbreak that had taken her parents, of the lonely months afterward trying to make ends meet in St. Louis. Owen seemed to read something of this in her expression. "I suspect there's quite a story behind that statement, Miss Walker. Perhaps someday I'll tell you," she said. "For now, I should return to Thomas." "I'll walk you back," Owen offered, instructing Deputy Fletcher to keep watch at the jail. As they walked, Rosalind asked, "Do you think they'll try again?" "The mob, not today," Owen replied. "But Tate has made many enemies. Until the judge arrives, we'll need to be vigilant." "Why did you become a sheriff?" Rosalind asked suddenly. "After losing your family that way, most men would have turned bitter, not devoted themselves to protecting others." Owen considered the question carefully. "After Sarah and Emma died, I was lost, angry at the world, at God, at myself for not being there. I drifted west, taking whatever work I could find." He paused, remembering. "Ended up in a small Nebraska settlement during an outlaw raid. Watched good people die because there was no law, no protection. Something clicked then. I couldn't save my family, but maybe I could save others." The simplicity and honesty of his answer touched Rosalind deeply. "You're a good man, Sheriff Daniels." "Owen," he corrected. "If you're staying in Council Bluffs, you might as well call me Owen." "Owen," she repeated, liking the way his name felt. "And I'm Rosalind, not Miss Walker." "Rosalind," he echoed, a warmth in his voice that sent a pleasant shiver through her. They reached the doctor's house, but before they parted, Owen hesitated. There's a social at the church this Saturday harvest celebration. It would be a good opportunity for you to meet the townspeople, especially if you're hoping to secure the teaching position. That sounds lovely, Rosalind replied, recognizing the invitation beneath his practical suggestion. I could escort you, Owen continued, a hint of uncertainty in his usually confident demeanor, if you'd like. I would like that very much, Rosalind answered, feeling her heart lighten for the first time in months. Owen's smile transformed his face again, making him appear younger, less burdened. I'll call for you at 6, then. As she watched him walk away, Rosalind felt a sensation she had nearly forgotten hope, blooming like a desert flower after rain. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Thomas recovered enough to sit up and take solid food, though Dr. Miller insisted he remain under observation for at least a week. Rosalind divided her time between her brother's bedside and preparations for her meeting with the town council. Owen introduced her to Mayor Garrett, a portly businessman with ambitious plans for Council Bluffs, and arranged for her interview with the Education Committee. To her delight, they were impressed by her credentials and experience teaching in St. Louis, offering her the position almost immediately. We can't offer much salary, Mrs. Peterson, the committee chairwoman, apologized. $25 a month plus lodging in the rooms above the schoolhouse. That's more than fair, Rosalind assured her. The schoolhouse itself was a simple one-room building, but well-maintained with desks for 20 students and a small collection of books. Classes have been suspended since Miss Thornton left, Mrs. Peterson explained. The children are falling behind. How soon could you start? As soon as my brother is well enough to return home, Rosalind replied. Perhaps 2 weeks. The arrangement was quickly settled, and Rosalind left the meeting feeling a sense of purpose she had lost after her parents' deaths. Council Bluffs was offering her a fresh start, an opportunity to build something new from the ashes of her old life. On her way back to the boarding house, she passed Owen outside the general store, deep in conversation with a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit. When Owen noticed her, he waved her over. Rosalind, this is Mr. Richard Harper from the railroad company. Mr. Harper, Miss Rosalind Walker, our new school teacher. Harper tipped his hat politely. Miss Walker, a pleasure. Mr. Harper is proposing a new rail spur that would come within a mile of your property, Owen explained. We were just discussing the implications for water rights in the area. The natural spring on your land would be extremely valuable to the railroad, Harper added. We'd be willing to negotiate very favorable terms for access rights. Rosalind felt a flicker of understanding. Is that why Tate was so determined to seize our property? He knew about the railroad plans. Harper had the grace to look uncomfortable. Tate approached our company some months ago, claiming he was acquiring various properties along the proposed route. We had no reason to suspect his methods were unscrupulous. I see, Rosalind replied coolly. Well, Mr. Harper, I'll discuss this with my brother when he's fully recovered. For now, our property remains exactly that ours. Of course, Harper nodded. Sheriff Daniels has made the situation quite clear. I merely wish to establish that the railroad is prepared to deal honestly, unlike Mr. Tate. After Harper departed, Owen looked at Rosalind with a mix of admiration and amusement. You handled that diplomatically. I've dealt with my share of overconfident men, she replied, thinking of the school board in St. Louis who had questioned her every decision. The railroad offer might be worth considering, Owen suggested as they walked together. Legal water rights could provide security for you and Thomas for years to come. Perhaps, Rosalind conceded, but not until I understand exactly what we'd be agreeing to. My father always said to read contracts twice and sleep on them once before signing. Wise advice, Owen agreed. How did the meeting with the Education Committee go? Rosalind's face brightened. They offered me the position. I start in 2 weeks once Thomas is back on his feet. Congratulations. The children here need a good teacher. His genuine pleasure in her success warmed her. I should tell Thomas the news, Rosalind said. Will I see you tomorrow evening for the social 6 o'clock? Owen confirmed. I'm looking forward to it. The church social proved to be the perfect introduction to Council Bluffs society. The modest white church had been decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty pumpkins, corn husks, and apple garlands adorning every surface. Nearly everyone in town attended, curious to meet the new schoolteacher and witness the unprecedented sight of their serious sheriff escorting a lady. Owen arrived at Mrs. Holloway's precisely at 6, wearing a clean black suit that Rosalind suspected was reserved for special occasions. He stood a little straighter when she descended the stairs in her best blue dress, her chestnut hair arranged in careful curls. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. At the church, Owen introduced Rosalind to what seemed like the entire population of Council Bluffs. She met parents of future students, shopkeepers, farmers, and the town's small professional class. Everyone was welcoming, if openly curious about her relationship with their sheriff. "Never seen Owen smile so much, Mrs. Baker whispered to Rosalind as they arranged desserts on the refreshment table. "That man's been carrying grief like a stone these past years. You must be special indeed." The evening included music from a small local band, dancing, and plenty of home-cooked food. Owen surprised Rosalind by being an accomplished dancer, guiding her confidently through a Virginia reel. "Where did a frontier sheriff learn to dance like this?" she asked as they promenaded down the line. "My mother insisted all her sons learn proper social graces," he replied. "Said we'd never find decent wives otherwise. And did your brothers find decent wives?" "Two did. John and Matthew both married and settled in Missouri. My youngest brother Samuel died at Vicksburg during the war." "I'm sorry," Rosalind said sincerely. "You've lost so much." Owen's hand tightened briefly around hers as they turned. "We all carry losses. It's what we build afterward that matters." Later, as they walked back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars, Rosalind felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. The cool evening air carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, and Owen's presence beside her felt increasingly right. "Thank you for tonight," she said as they reached Mrs. Holloway's porch. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much in a very long time." "Nor have I," Owen admitted. "You've brought something back to life in me, Rosalind, something I thought was gone forever." The honesty in his voice touched her deeply. Without overthinking, she reached up and placed a gentle hand on his cheek. "I know exactly what you mean." For a moment, they stood perfectly still, the space between them charged with possibility. Then, with gentle deliberation, Owen bent and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both tender and restrained, respectful of her reputation yet unmistakably charged with feeling. When they parted, Rosalind felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. This man, this honorable, courageous man who had ridden through fire to save her and her brother, was becoming essential to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Good night, Rosalind," Owen said softly. "Good night, Owen." As she prepared for bed that night, Rosalind found herself humming the tunes from the social, her mind replaying the evening's events. For the first time since receiving Thomas's desperate telegram, she felt certain that coming to Council Bluffs had been not just necessary, but perhaps destined. The next morning brought startling news. Thomas was sitting up in bed, looking considerably better when Rosalind arrived for her daily visit. "Vernon Tate escaped," he announced without preamble. "Sheriff Daniels was here earlier, said Tate somehow got a file into his cell and slipped out during the night." Rosalind felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "Did they catch him?" Thomas shook his head. "They found tracks heading west toward the territories, but Owen, the sheriff is worried Tate might circle back, try to finish what he started with us." "What did Owen suggest?" "He thinks I should stay in town until I'm fully recovered, maybe even until the circuit judge arrives. Says you shouldn't go out to the homestead alone at all." Rosalind frowned. "But the animals need tending, and I need to prepare the cabin if I'm going to live there while teaching." "He thought of that," Thomas said. "Deputy Fletcher is going out today to check on things and bring back anything we need, and Thomas hesitated. "He suggested you might consider other arrangements, said the rooms above the schoolhouse might be safer." Understanding dawned on Rosalind. Owen was concerned for her safety, but trying not to overstep bounds by telling her directly what to do. It was considerate, if somewhat unnecessary. "I'll speak with him," she decided. "Where can I find him at this hour?" Said he'd be at the livery, getting a search party organized. The livery stable was bustling with activity when Rosalind arrived. 6 men on horseback were receiving instructions from Owen, who looked as though he hadn't slept all night. His expression brightened momentarily when he saw her, then grew serious again. "Thomas told you about Tate," he said, leading her slightly away from the others. "Yes, you're organizing a search," Owen nodded grimly. "We'll check all the likely routes west, but Tate's crafty could be hiding anywhere waiting for his chance." "You think he'll come after us again," Rosalind stated. "Men like Tate don't let go of grudges easily," Owen confirmed. "Especially now that he's facing serious prison time if caught, makes him more desperate, more dangerous." "I won't hide in town indefinitely," Rosalind said firmly. "That homestead is our future. I won't be driven from it by fear." Owen's jaw tightened. "I'm not asking you to hide forever, just until we catch him or until the judge arrives and we can get proper legal protection established for your property." "And how long will that be? Weeks? Months?" Rosalind crossed her arms. "I start teaching in 9 days. I need to be settled by then." "The schoolhouse has accommodations," Owen reminded her. "You'd be safer there in town." "While Thomas does what? Stays in town too. Who tends our farm, our animals?" Owen ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm trying to keep you safe, Rosalind. Is that so unreasonable?" Their gazes locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Rosalind softened slightly. "I appreciate your concern, truly, but we can't put our lives on hold because of one man's threats." Owen recognized the determination in her eyes, the same determination he'd seen when she refused to surrender to Tate's men despite the encroaching fire. It was part of what drew him to her. "A compromise, then," he suggested. "Stay in town until Thomas is fully recovered. By then, we might have caught Tate, or at least have a better sense of his whereabouts. After that, I'll help you both return to the homestead, make sure it's secure." Rosalind considered the proposal. It was reasonable, and truth be told, she wasn't eager to face Tate alone if he did return. "Agreed, but Deputy Fletcher brings back my teaching materials from the cabin today. I have preparations to make." "Deal," Owen nodded, relieved. "Now I need to catch up with the search party. Will you be at Mrs. Holloway's this evening?" "Where else would I be?" Rosalind smiled. "I'll stop by when I return, let you know if we've found anything," Owen promised. As she watched him mount his horse and lead the men out of town, Rosalind felt a complex mixture of emotions. Concern for his safety, appreciation for his protectiveness, and a deepening affection that both thrilled and terrified her. It seemed impossible that she could have developed such strong feelings in less than a week, yet here she was, watching the road long after Owen had disappeared from view. The search party returned at dusk, muddy and tired, with no sign of Tate. Owen reported to Rosalind as promised, looking exhausted but determined. "We'll try again tomorrow, check farther north," he said, accepting the coffee Mrs. Holloway insisted on serving him. "He can't have gone far on foot." "Unless someone helped him," Rosalind suggested. Owen's expression darkened. "That's what I'm afraid of. Tate has connections, business partners who might have helped him escape." "Like the railroad company?" Rosalind asked, recalling Mr. Harper's interest in their spring. "Possibly, though Harper seemed genuinely surprised by Tate's methods." Owen rubbed his eyes wearily. "More likely someone local who stood to profit from Tate's land acquisitions." "You should rest," Rosalind said gently. "You look ready to fall over." A tired smile crossed his face. "Is that concern I hear, Miss Walker?" "Obviously," she replied without hesitation. "I've grown rather fond of you, Sheriff Daniels. I'd prefer you didn't collapse from exhaustion." The simple honesty in her words seemed to touch him deeply. "Rosalind," he began, then hesitated, searching for the right words. "Yes," she prompted when he remained silent. "I know we've known each other only a short time," Owen said carefully, "and I have no right to speak of such things yet, but I want you to know that He paused again, struggling. "That is, I find myself thinking of you constantly." Rosalind felt warmth spread through her chest. I think of you too, Owen. When this business with Tate is settled, he continued with more confidence, I'd like to call on you properly, if you're amenable. I'm very amenable, Rosalind assured him, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Holloway bustling in with more coffee. Sheriff, you should eat something. I've got stew keeping warm. Owen accepted the offer gratefully, and the conversation turned to more practical matters, arrangements for Thomas's continued recovery, preparations for Rosalind's teaching position, and security measures for the town while Tate remained at large. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Owen finally took his leave, promising to return the following evening with news of the day's search. At the door, he took Rosalind's hand in his, pressing it warmly between both of his own. Be careful, he said simply. Tate's still out there. You be careful too, she replied. You're the one tracking an armed fugitive. Their eyes held for a long moment before Owen reluctantly released her hand and stepped into the night. The next 5 days fell into a pattern. Owen and his deputies continued searching for Tate, widening their circle each day without success. Thomas improved steadily under Dr. Miller's care, preparing to return to the homestead by the end of the week. Rosalind divided her time between visiting her brother, preparing lessons for her new students, and spending evenings with Owen when he returned from searching. Each day, their connection deepened. Owen shared stories of his childhood in Missouri, his years as a deputy marshal, and gradually, more details about his wife Sarah and daughter Emma. In turn, Rosalind told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, moving west with her parents after the war, and the difficult years after their deaths when she struggled to support herself and send money to Thomas. I had a position at a ladies' academy in St. Louis, she explained one evening as they walked along Council Bluffs' quiet Main Street, teaching English literature and composition. Why did you leave? Owen asked. It sounds like a respectable position. Rosalind hesitated. The headmistress's son returned from university back east. He took an interest in me that I didn't reciprocate. When I refused his advances, his mother found reasons to criticize my teaching, my appearance, everything. Owen's expression hardened. He forced himself on you, he tried, Rosalind admitted. I fought him off, but the damage was done. His mother claimed I had encouraged him, then rejected him cruelly. I was given the choice to resign or be dismissed. That's outrageous, Owen growled, his protective instincts flaring. It's the way of the world sometimes, Rosalind said with resignation. But it's why Thomas's telegram came at such a perfect time. I needed a new start as much as he needed help. Owen took her hand, squeezing it gently. I'm sorry that happened to you, but selfishly I can't regret that it brought you here. Nor can I, Rosalind agreed, returning the pressure of his hand. Despite everything, Tate, the fire, Thomas's injury, I feel I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. On the 6th day after Tate's escape, Dr. Miller finally declared Thomas well enough to return home. No strenuous activity for another week, he cautioned, and come back if the headaches worsen. Owen arranged for Deputy Fletcher to accompany them to the homestead, insisting on inspecting the property himself first to ensure it was safe. The cabin looks secure, he reported when he returned. No sign anyone's been there since Fletcher checked it last week. The livestock are fine neighbors' boys been feeding them as requested. The 3-mile journey to the Walker homestead took them through rolling prairie dotted with small farms and homesteads. The landscape still bore dark scars from the fire, but new green growth was already emerging from the blackened earth. As they crested the final hill, Rosalind caught her first proper look at what would now be her home. The cabin was modest but sturdy, built of local timber with a stone chimney. A small barn stood nearby with a corral for horses and a chicken coop. A vegetable garden, now mostly harvested for the season, stretched behind the cabin. Beyond that, a creek wound through the property, leading to the natural spring that had caused so much trouble. It's lovely, Rosalind said sincerely as Owen helped her down from the wagon. Father chose well. He built it all himself, Thomas said proudly. Every log, every nail. The spring's about a 1/4 mile that way, Owen pointed west. It forms a small pool before continuing as a stream downhill. That's the valuable part: constant fresh water, even in drought years. Rosalind nodded thoughtfully. No wonder Tate wanted it so badly, especially with the railroad potentially coming through. They spent the afternoons settling and airing out the cabin, checking supplies and tending to the animals. Deputy Fletcher departed after ensuring everything was in order, but Owen lingered, his concern for their safety evident. "I don't like leaving you both out here," he admitted as evening approached. "Tate's still unaccounted for. We'll be careful," Rosalind assured him. "Thomas has his father's rifle, and I'm not helpless myself." "I know," Owen sighed. "You're possibly the least helpless woman I've ever met." Still, he surveyed the isolated homestead, calculating distances and risks. "You can't stay here forever, Owen," Rosalind said gently. "You have responsibilities in town." "I could come back tonight," he suggested. "Sleep in the barn, keep watch." Thomas, who had been quietly observing their exchange, spoke up. "That might cause talk, Sheriff, my sister's reputation and all." Owen's face flushed slightly. "I hadn't considered that. I didn't mean to imply, we know," Rosalind assured him, touched by his embarrassment. "But Thomas is right. People would talk." "People already talk," Owen pointed out, "about us." "Yes, but there's a difference between escorting me to church socials and spending nights on our property," Rosalind replied practically. "Besides, I start teaching Monday. I'll be in town every day, staying at the schoolhouse most nights. Thomas won't be alone for long stretches." Owen reluctantly conceded the point. "Promise you'll send word immediately if anything seems amiss, anything at all." "I promise," Rosalind said solemnly. Before departing, Owen pulled Thomas aside for a brief, private conversation, then embraced the young man in a way that suggested more than mere friendship had developed between them. Watching them, Rosalind felt a surge of gratitude that her brother had found such a positive male influence in Owen. When Owen returned to bid her farewell, his expression was serious. "Be vigilant," he said quietly. "Keep doors locked, windows shuttered at night." "We will," Rosalind promised. Then impulsively she reached up and kissed his cheek. "Thank you for everything, Owen." His face softened. "I'll see you Sunday, for church." "We'll be there," she confirmed. As Owen rode away, Rosalind watched until he disappeared from sight, a mixture of emotions swirling within her. In just 2 weeks, this man had become central to her thoughts, her plans, her future. The intensity of her feelings should have frightened her, yet somehow it felt right, as though her heart had recognized something in Owen that her mind was still discovering. "He's in love with you, you know," Thomas said matter-of-factly as they prepared a simple supper together. Rosalind nearly dropped the pot she was holding. "Thomas, that's a very presumptuous statement." "It's not presumptuous if it's obviously true," her brother countered. "The way he looks at you when you're not watching, like you're water in the desert." "We've known each other barely 2 weeks," Rosalind protested, though her heart quickened at her brother's words. "Some things don't need time," Thomas said with surprising wisdom for his 19 years. "They just need the right circumstances. Like seeds that wait years for the right rain, then bloom overnight." Rosalind studied her brother thoughtfully. "When did you become so poetic about matters of the heart?" A shadow crossed Thomas's face. "When I watched father grieve for mother, I suppose. Taught me love doesn't always need words or time to be real." The simple truth of this silenced Rosalind's objections. Perhaps Thomas was right. Perhaps what she felt for Owen and he for her was one of those rare connections that defied conventional timelines and expectations. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect weather for the 3-mile journey to town for church services. Rosalind wore her second-best dress, a green wool that complemented her eyes, while Thomas polished his only pair of good boots for the occasion. They arrived at the white clapboard church just as the bell began to ring, joining the stream of townspeople entering for the service. Owen was waiting near the steps, his face brightening visibly when he spotted them. "No sign of Tate?" Thomas asked quietly as they approached. Owen shook his head. "Nothing, it's as if he vanished into thin air." "Perhaps he's fled the territory entirely," Rosalind suggested hopefully. Perhaps, Owen agreed, though his tone suggested he doubted it. You both look well. The homestead agrees with you. It's good to be home, Thomas nodded. Though Rosie's been fussing over me like a mother hen. Someone has to, Rosalind retorted affectionately, adjusting her brother's collar. The church service passed pleasantly, with Reverend Mitchell delivering a sermon on perseverance through trials that seemed particularly appropriate given recent events. Afterward, the congregation lingered outside, enjoying the fine weather and catching up on local news. Rosalind found herself surrounded by curious mothers wanting to know about her teaching methods before entrusting their children to her care. Owen stood a respectful distance away, discussing town business with Mayor Garrett, though his eyes frequently strayed in her direction. Sheriff Daniels seems quite attentive, Mrs. Evans observed with a knowing smile. Never seen him so interested in church socializing before. Rosalind felt a blush rise to her cheeks. We've become friends through difficult circumstances. Friends, Mrs. Evans repeated skeptically. Well, he's a good man, Miss Walker, the best in these parts if you ask me, lonely too long. Before Rosalind could respond, a commotion near the church gate drew everyone's attention. A rider was approaching at speed, his horse lathered with exertion. It was one of the farmhands from the Peterson place north of town. Fire, the man shouted as he reined his horse to a stop. Fire at the Walker homestead. Rosalind felt the blood drain from her face. Thomas was instantly at her side, his expression mirroring her horror. Owen rushed forward. Are you certain, the Walker place specifically? Yes, sir, the farmhand nodded emphatically. Saw the smoke rising as I was checking fence lines. Cabin's fully engulfed by now, I reckon. Thomas grabbed Rosalind's hand. Our home. Owen was already issuing orders, organizing men to form a bucket brigade from the creek. Fletcher, get the wagon. Peterson, round up every able-bodied man. He turned to Rosalind and Thomas. Stay here where it's safe. No, Rosalind said firmly. It's our home. We're coming. Owen looked as though he might argue, then nodded curtly. Stay with me, then. The ride back to the homestead was a blur of dust and dread. As they crested the final hill, Rosalind's worst fears were confirmed. The cabin was engulfed in flames, orange tongues licking hungrily at the roof timbers. Black smoke billowed skyward, visible for miles around. No, Thomas moaned beside her. Everything Father built. Owen's wagon reached the property first, the men leaping down to organize a water line from the creek, but Rosalind could see it was already too late to save the cabin. The fire had too much of a head start, the structure too fully involved. The barn, Owen shouted. Focus on saving the barn and livestock. As the men redirected their efforts, Rosalind scanned the scene, a horrible suspicion forming in her mind. This was no accident, not with them all away at church, not with the cabin so completely ablaze so quickly. Tate, she whispered, the name like poison on her tongue. As if summoned by her words, a rifle shot cracked from the tree line beyond the burning cabin. One of the townsmen cried out, clutching his arm as he fell. Take cover, Owen roared, drawing his pistol and pulling Rosalind behind the wagon. It's an ambush, more shots followed, sending the bucket brigade scattering for shelter. Thomas crawled to join Rosalind and Owen behind the wagon's meager protection. How many? Thomas asked, peering cautiously around the wheel. At least 3 shooters, Owen replied grimly, spread out along the trees. Rosalind's mind raced. The spring. They're trying to drive us away from the spring. Owen nodded, his expression darkening, and doing a damn good job of it. He checked his ammunition. I need to get these people to safety. What about our home? Thomas demanded. Gone, Owen said bluntly. But the barn might be saved if we can deal with those shooters. Another volley of bullets splintered the wagon wood above their heads. Owen returned fire, aiming carefully at muzzle flashes in the distant trees. I count 4 men, he updated. Tate's almost certainly one of them. What do we do? Rosalind asked, struggling to remain calm, Owen's jaw set with determination. I'm going to circle around, try to flank them. You two stay here. When I start firing from the side, the townsmen can advance from here. That's suicide, Rosalind protested. You'll be exposed crossing that open ground. I don't see another option, Owen replied. "They've got us pinned and the fire's spreading toward the barn." Before Rosalind could argue further, the situation changed dramatically. The attackers, apparently tired of the standoff, set fire to the dry grass between the trees and the cabin. A new wall of flames began advancing toward their position, driven by the wind. "They're trying to smoke us out," Thomas realized. Owen's expression hardened. "Or burn us alive." He made a swift decision. "Everyone back to the wagons, we need to retreat." As the townsmen began a fighting withdrawal, Owen stayed at the rear, providing covering fire. Rosalind and Thomas reluctantly joined the retreat, watching in despair as their homestead was consumed by flames. The attackers pressed their advantage, advancing behind the wall of fire, shots coming more frequently as they closed the distance. "Go," Owen shouted to the last stragglers. "Get to town." Most had reached the wagons when disaster struck. Thomas, who had run back to try saving a prized possession from their father's trunk near the barn, cried out and fell, a bullet finding its mark in his leg. "Thomas!" Rosalind screamed, starting back toward her brother. Owen grabbed her arm. "Stay down." Then, without hesitation, he sprinted toward Thomas, zigzagging to avoid the bullets that kicked up dirt around him. Reaching the fallen young man, Owen hoisted him over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and turned back toward safety. But the fire had advanced rapidly, cutting off their direct route to the wagons. They were trapped between the flames and the gunmen. From her position, Rosalind watched in horror as Owen assessed their dire situation. Then, with grim determination, he did the unthinkable. He charged directly toward the advancing wall of fire, Thomas still slung over his shoulder. "No," Rosalind cried, certain she was witnessing their deaths, but Owen didn't hesitate. He ran straight at the thinnest part of the fire line, his powerful legs driving him forward with desperate speed. For a heart-stopping moment, man and burden disappeared into the smoke and flames. Then, like an apparition, Owen emerged on the other side, his clothes smoking, Thomas still clutched tightly against him. He staggered several steps before regaining his balance, then continued toward the wagons where Rosalind waited, tears streaming down her face. When Owen reached her, he gently lowered Thomas into waiting arms. The young man was conscious but pale with shock and pain, his trouser legs soaked with blood. "Get him to the doctor," Owen ordered, his voice hoarse from smoke. "Now." As they loaded Thomas into a wagon, Rosalind turned to Owen, noticing for the first time the angry burns on his hands and forearms, the singed hair, the raw red patches on his face where the fire had kissed his skin. "Owen," she whispered, reaching toward him. He caught her hand, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "You're worth every scar I'll earn tonight," he said simply. Before Rosalind could respond, more shots rang out. The attackers were closing in. "Go," Owen urged, helping her into the wagon beside Thomas. "I'll hold them off while you get to safety." "Not without you," Rosalind insisted, gripping his burned hand despite knowing it must cause him pain. "I'll follow," he promised, "but someone needs to slow them down or they'll pursue." With that, he slapped the wagon horse's rump, sending the vehicle lurching forward. Rosalind watched in anguish as Owen took position behind a rocky outcropping, his revolver ready. The journey back to Council Bluffs passed in anxious blur. Thomas slipped in and out of consciousness, the bullet wound in his thigh bleeding despite Rosalind's attempts to bind it with strips torn from her petticoat. "Will the sheriff be all right?" Thomas mumbled during a lucid moment. "He has to be," Rosalind replied, as much to convince herself as her brother. At Dr. Miller's office, organized chaos ensued as the wounded were brought in. The doctor quickly assessed Thomas's injury, clean through the muscle, he pronounced. "Painful but not life-threatening if infection doesn't set in," he looked at Rosalind. "The sheriff, still back there," she said, her voice breaking, "holding them off." Dr. Miller's expression grew grave. "Those burns I glimpsed looked serious. He needs treatment soon." The minutes stretched into an hour, then two. Thomas's wound was cleaned, stitched, and bandaged. The other injured townsman was treated for a bullet graze. Still, no sign of Owen. Just as Rosalind was preparing to organize a search party, commotion erupted outside. Rushing to the window, she saw Owen dismounting from a lathered horse, his movements stiff with pain but very much alive. She flew outside, propriety forgotten as she threw her arms around him. "You're alive?" Owen winced but returned her embrace. "Barely," he admitted, "but I bring good news." "We caught Tate." "How?" Rosalind pulled back to look at him. "The fool tried to circle around behind me," Owen explained, his voice rough from smoke inhalation. "Stepped right into a prairie dog hole and broke his ankle. I found him crawling back toward his horse. And the others?" "Two dead, one escaped," Owen reported grimly. "Tate's confessed everything: the forged documents, the railroad connection, even hiring men to burn you out." His expression hardened. "He'll hang this time." Only then did Rosalind fully register Owen's condition. His clothes were burned in multiple places, his hands and forearms badly blistered, his face reddened and raw on one side where the fire had reached him. "You need the doctor," she insisted, leading him inside. "Thomas first," Owen countered. "How is he?" "He'll recover," Rosalind assured him. The bullet passed clean through his thigh. Relief visibly washed over Owen. "Thank God." Dr. Miller insisted on treating Owen immediately, declaring his burns serious but not life-threatening with proper care. "You're lucky," he told Owen as he applied salve to the angry red skin. "Another few seconds in that fire and we'd be having a very different conversation." "Worth it," Owen replied, his eyes finding Rosalind's across the room. That night, Rosalind sat between the two beds where Thomas and Owen rested, her heart full of conflicting emotions. Gratitude that they were alive, grief for their lost home and possessions, anger at Tate and his accomplices, and something else, something deeper and more profound that centered on the man who had twice now risked his life in fire to protect her and her brother. "You should rest," Owen said softly, noticing her exhaustion. "So should you," she countered. "Those burns need a mobility to heal properly." A small smile touched his lips despite his pain. "Are you going to be this bossy when we're married?" The words hung in the air between them, both shocking and somehow inevitable. Rosalind's breath caught in her throat. "Owen Daniels," she said carefully, "did you just propose to me in the most casual manner imaginable while lying in a sick?" "I believe I did," he admitted. "Poor timing." "The worst," she agreed, but couldn't stop the smile spreading across her face. "Ask me again when you're not delirious from pain and smoke." "I'm not delirious," Owen insisted. "Near-death experiences have a way of clarifying what matters, and you, Rosalind Walker, matter more to me than anything." Thomas, who had been pretending to sleep, chuckled from the next bed. "Told you he was in love with you, Rosie." Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Go back to sleep, Thomas." "Not until you answer the man," her brother replied stubbornly. "He did ride through fire for us after all." Looking at Owen, his face raw and blistered, his eyes tired but full of genuine affection, Rosalind felt the last of her hesitation melt away. Life on the frontier was uncertain and often short. Why waste time pretending this wasn't exactly what she wanted? "Yes," she said simply. "When you're properly healed and can kneel like a gentleman, I will marry you, Owen Daniels." The smile that transformed his face was worth every hardship they had endured. The following weeks brought both challenges and blessings. The Walker homestead was a charred ruin, the cabin completely destroyed, but the barn had survived, along with most of the livestock. More importantly, the natural spring remained untouched, its value undiminished. With Tate securely in jail awaiting the circuit judge, Mr. Harper from the railroad company approached Rosalind and Thomas with a revised offer, a fair price for water rights only, leaving the land itself in their possession. With Owen's guidance, they negotiated terms that would provide financial security for years to come. "We can rebuild," Thomas said confidently as they surveyed their property a month after the fire. His leg was healing well, though he still walked with a slight limp. "Better than before." "Yes," Rosalind agreed, "but first, you have a schoolteacher to help prepare for her wedding." The town of Council Bluffs had embraced their romance wholeheartedly, with even the most gossip-prone citizens agreeing that Sheriff Daniels and Miss Walker were perfectly suited. The fact that Owen had literally ridden through fire twice for Rosalind made their story the stuff of local legend. Owen's burns healed slowly but steadily, leaving scars on his hands and forearms that he wore without complaint. Badges of honor, he called them, reminders of what matters most. They were married on a crisp December morning in the same church where they had received news of the fire. Reverend Mitchell officiated, his sermon touching on the refining nature of fire, how the hottest flames produced the purest gold, how trials by fire revealed true character. Rosalind wore a simple ivory dress that Mrs. Holloway had helped her make, with Thomas proudly walking her down the aisle. Owen stood tall and straight at the altar, his scars visible on his hands as he reached for hers. Their vows were brief but heartfelt, promising to stand together through whatever fires life might bring their way. The celebration afterward filled the town hall with seemingly every resident of Council Bluffs in attendance. Even Dr. Miller abandoned his usual reserve to propose a toast. To the sheriff and his lady, may their courage in facing flames be matched only by the warmth of their hearth. Later that evening, as Owen escorted his bride to their new home, a modest but comfortable house near the sheriff's office, Rosalind reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. "Do you ever wonder," she asked as they walked arm in arm through the quiet streets, "what would have happened if Thomas had never sent that telegram, if I had never come to Council Bluffs?" Owen considered the question seriously. "I believe some souls are meant to find each other," he said finally. "If not through that telegram, then some other way, some other time." "A romantic notion for a practical lawman," Rosalind teased gently. "You've changed me," Owen admitted without embarrassment. "Before you came, I was existing, not living, doing my duty, nothing more." He touched her cheek tenderly. "You brought the fire back to my heart, Rosalind, a different kind of flame." At their doorstep, Owen surprised her by sweeping her into his arms despite his still healing burns. "Tradition," he explained as he carried her across the threshold. Inside, the small house was warm and welcoming, with simple furniture and a few precious belongings saved from both their pasts. On the mantel stood a photograph of Owen's first wife and daughter alongside a daguerreotype of Rosalind's parents' acknowledgments of the love that had shaped them before they found each other. "It's perfect," Rosalind said sincerely as she explored their new home. "It's just the beginning," Owen replied, drawing her into his arms. "The first chapter of many." 5 years later, Rosalind sat on the porch of their rebuilt homestead, watching Owen teach their 3-year-old daughter Emma how to gentle a new foal in the corral. Nearby, Thomas, now a strapping young man of 24, worked on expanding the barn to accommodate their growing herd. The railroad spur had indeed come through the region, making Council Bluffs an increasingly important stop on the journey west. The water rights agreement had provided enough capital to rebuild their home larger and sturdier than before, with Owen adding improvements each year. Rosalind continued teaching in town 3 days a week, having trained a young assistant to handle the other days. The arrangement allowed her to balance her passion for education with her growing family. Owen had finally stepped down as sheriff the previous year, though he still served as a deputy when needed. Mostly, he focused on their homestead and their daughter, finding in fatherhood a healing joy he had never expected to experience again. As twilight approached, Owen carried a sleepy Emma up to the porch, her small head resting trustingly on his shoulder. The little girl had Rosalind's chestnut hair but Owen's determined spirit, a perfect blend of her parents. "She wants a story before bed," Owen reported, settling onto the porch swing beside Rosalind. "Which one?" Rosalind asked, though she already knew the answer. "The one about the brave sheriff," Emma mumbled against her father's shirt. "Who rode through fire." Owen's eyes met Rosalind's over their daughter's head, years of shared love and challenges reflected in that single glance. "Well," Rosalind began, taking her daughter's small hand in hers, "it happened right here on this very land. A brave sheriff rode through fire to save a brother and sister who were in terrible danger." As she recounted their story, carefully edited for young ears, Rosalind watched the sunset painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. The land that had nearly cost them everything had become their legacy, their future. When Emma finally dozed off, Owen carried her inside to her bed. Returning to the porch, he sat beside Rosalind and took her hand, his thumb tracing the faint scars that remained from that fateful day. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, a question he posed on each anniversary of their first meeting. Rosalind leaned against his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every fire, every scar brought us here. How could I regret any of it?" Owen's arm tightened around her as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Together they watched night settle over their land, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else together, unafraid of the flames.